No one knew exactly where Alexander the Great's father was buried for over 2,000 years. Now we finally have an answer. And it turns out that archaeologists may have been looking at the wrong tomb for years. If you want to understand how Alexander became so great, you have to start with his father, King Philip II. He made Macedonia powerful and gave Alexander what he needed to conquer a huge part of the world. Philip lost his life in 336 BCE, and for a long time, no one knew for sure where he was buried. That is, until now. Archaeologists always suspected that Alexander the Great's family was buried in a royal tomb complex in Aigai, which is now Vergina, Greece. This ancient city had been almost forgotten for around 2,000 years until 1977, when an archaeologist discovered 4 royal tombs there. But 3 of them especially caught specialists' attention. They were immediately sure that one of them belonged to King Philip II. But which one? Most people agreed that Tomb 3 belonged to Alexander the Great's son, Alexander IV. So the real debate was between Tomb 1 and Tomb 2. For a long time, most experts believed Philip was buried in Tomb 2. But there was one big problem. Philip walked with a limp. And some studies suggest that whoever was buried in Tomb 2 did not have any clear injury to his leg. That leaves us with Tomb 1. But Tomb 1 had another problem. It was kind of underwhelming. It was small, poorly built, and did not have a marble sarcophagus. The other 2 tombs were bigger and much more impressive. So why would a powerful king be buried in the least impressive tomb? Experts actually have a good explanation for that. They say Philip II's tomb was probably simple and relatively poor because Alexander was low on money at the time. He was getting ready to invade Asia, and that took a lot of resources. But before we call Tomb 1 the winner, researchers had to prove it. So a team of archaeologists used imaging and scientific analysis techniques, including X-rays, CT scans, and radiocarbon dating, and compared the data with what we know about King Philip's life. And they concluded that King Philip II was most likely buried in Tomb 1, not Tomb 2. He was not alone, though. The tomb also held the remains of a woman and a child. Researchers now believe they were Philip's son and his wife Cleopatra. No, not that Cleopatra. That means Tomb 2 most likely belonged to Alexander's half-brother, King Aridaeus, and his wife, Adia Eurydice. So even though this new study offers strong evidence, the mystery of Philip II's tomb may not be completely solved yet, and researchers are still debating it. This coffin seems to make no sense. No visible openings, no way in or out. And yet, inside lies Lady Shanet, a mysterious woman from ancient Egypt, perfectly preserved even after 3,000 years. How did she get there? It was the 3rd intermediate period in Egypt, a time between great dynasties. Pharaohs wore blue crowns, priests and thieves were almost as powerful as kings. Markets were filled with the cries of merchants selling dates, papyrus, and precious perfumes. Lady Shanet was in her late 30s or early 40s, old age by Egyptian standards at that time. Like other Egyptians at the time, she ate meals of bread, lentils, and fish. By that age, her teeth were already badly worn down, yellowish, with enamel eroded, because food in ancient Egypt often had grains of sand in it. But she was not just a regular woman. When she passed away for unknown reasons, her burial was lavish. Locals wrapped her body in expensive linen and added artificial eyes to replace her real ones so she could see in the afterlife. And that is exactly how we found her 3,000 years later, in a beautifully decorated sarcophagus. It was made of cartonnage, which is kind of like papier-mâché, made by layering linen and papyrus with adhesive. These coffins were incredibly strong, lasting for thousands of years, all thanks to Egypt's super dry climate. But most importantly, Egyptians only used it for the elite. So she was someone very important to the locals, though we might never know why. But there was only one huge problem with her mummy. How did they even put her in the coffin? No matter how much researchers looked, there were simply no entry points. The only visible gap was a tiny slit near her feet, but that is not nearly big enough to place her entire body inside. This mystery puzzled them for decades until they finally learned the truth only recently. They studied those mummies at the Field Museum in Chicago using new technology, CT scans. It is basically like taking thousands of X-rays and putting them together to create detailed 3D images. That is how we can learn more about the bodies without disturbing them. And it turns out the ancient Egyptians were unbelievably clever. They did not construct the cartonnage around Shanet's body, which would have been a common and easy thing to do. Instead, embalmers created the coffin first. Then they softened this coffin with moisture to make it flexible. After that, they carefully molded it around her wrapped body. They did cut a slit along the back of the coffin to do that, but then they laced it up like a corset so it looked like there were no openings. Finally, they secured a wooden panel at her feet to keep everything in place. That is where the tiny slit came from. Usually the insides were removed and put in jars, symbolically guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. Egyptians believed that the deceased would need all that stuff once they got into the afterlife. They also thought it would help preserve the body for ages, which, as we can see, worked amazingly well. Thanks to their beliefs, we now have mummies as time capsules. Each son of Horus was supposed to protect one specific body part. The human-headed Imseti for the liver, the baboon-headed Hapi for the lungs, the jackal-headed Duamutef for the stomach, and the falcon-headed Kebesinuef for the intestines. It is amazing how much effort the embalmers put into their job. Especially in Lady Shanet case, they wanted to make sure her body remained untouched and the sarcophagus would be perfect for her. You cannot help but wonder who she was, if she mattered so much. The ancient Egyptians literally viewed the afterlife like modern retirement planning. You were not just passing away, you had to prepare yourself for it. Prepare the body, eyes to see, and so on. And the richer or more important you were, the better your afterlife would be. But Shanet was not the only fascinating mummy they studied. They also decided to scan Harwa, an Egyptian man who lived around the same time. Judging by the mummy, he also had a high social status. His mummy revealed no signs of hard labor, and his teeth were well kept, which means he enjoyed some high-quality food without tons of sand in it. Some people got lucky both in life and after it, but there were many mysterious mummies throughout history. One of them is Xin Zhui, also known as Lady Dai. The story of her began in 1968. Some workers near Changsha, China, were digging an air raid shelter for a hospital. But suddenly, they accidentally uncovered an ancient burial site. They went down there and stumbled upon something incredible. 3 tombs belonging to a noble woman, her husband, and a young man believed to be their son. She was a noble woman from ancient China, and she had a fascinating backstory. She lived over 2,000 years ago during the Western Han Dynasty. She was married to Li Cang, a man who served as chancellor to the Changsha Kingdom, a high-ranking official. At first, it looks like Lady Dai lived a life of luxury and privilege. She had private musicians to play at her parties and for her personal enjoyment. She probably played the guqin, an instrument that people back then connected with intellect and elegance, and she certainly ate like an empress. Fine meats, delicacies, and things like that. Even her wardrobe was full of exquisite silk, not even counting the tons of cosmetics. But all this wealth came at a cost. The older she got, the worse her health became. She got the full package: a heart condition, diabetes, high blood pressure, and liver issues. It also looks like her back was causing her terrible pain, probably making it hard for her to even move. Finally, as the cherry on top, she developed gallstones. All of this together eventually led to a heart attack that took her life around the age of 50. There was one haunting detail. Scientists found over 130 melon seeds in her stomach and intestines. Most likely, she ate watermelon just hours before she passed away, which means it was probably during summer when the fruit was ripe. She enjoyed a sweet, simple treat before her life was cut short. The excavation began in 1972, And this was not easy at all. Over 1,500 local students had to help, and Lady Dai was the most mysterious one. She was buried in 4 rectangular pine boxes, one inside the other like a matryoshka doll, all wrapped in 20 layers of silk, and all sealed with lots of charcoal and white clay. The coffins were beautifully painted as well, decorated with protective deities, mythical animals, and clouds, which symbolized the heavens. There were drawings of divine creatures and Mount Kunlun. The myth said that on this mountain, people reach eternal happiness. All this told us a lot about the Han Dynasty, their beliefs about the afterlife, art, daily life, and their remarkable craftsmanship. And then researchers finally got to the body. It was astonishing. Soft skin, joints that could still bend, and in general, she was almost intact. She even kept her hair, eyelashes, fingerprints, and even traces of blood. It is like she literally passed away only a few weeks ago. Ancient people used a very clever technique to preserve her. It looks like embalmers put her into some weird, mysterious, acidic liquid. This liquid prevented bacteria from growing. Unfortunately, it also gave rashes to all the scientists who touched Lady Dai. And this rash lasted for 3 months. And do you know what they buried with her? Over 1,400 artifacts, mostly personal items like silk clothes, cosmetics, and musical instruments, even food, grains, meats, wine, and pastries. There were also 162 carved wooden figurines of various servants and musicians. It is possible that they were either there to serve her even in the afterlife, or maybe they were based on her real servants. Over 200 mysterious tombs were found in the desert between the Nile and the Red Sea. That would make sense if they belonged to ancient Egyptians, except they did not. They were much older. So who were these people? And more importantly, what happened to them? This all started when archaeologists were using satellite images to look for strange things in the Atbai Desert. Then something stood out. They kept finding these large, circular mass graves filled with the bones of people and animals. And some of them were carefully arranged around one key person in the center, maybe a chief or another important member of the community. They found 280 enclosure burials in total, 260 of which had never been documented before. Some were up to 260 feet wide, with humans, cattle, sheep, and goats buried inside. And now, researchers are more confused than ever, because this was not the first time something like this had been found. Similar, large, circular burial monuments have already been found in the deserts of Egypt and Sudan. And now, these newly discovered tombs seem to be part of a much bigger picture. What once looked like isolated examples is now starting to look like a clear pattern. And this pattern suggests that a single ancient culture may have spread across this huge stretch of desert, from the borders of modern Sudan to the slopes of the Red Sea hills. Studies suggest these people lived roughly between 4000 and 2000 BCE, just before the Egyptians formed the territorial kingdom we know as Pharaonic Egypt. And unlike the ancient Egyptians, who were focused on farming and city life, these people were nomads, moving around the desert and raising herds. But that does not quite match with the fact that some tombs seem more special than others. I mean, in some of these enclosures, the main person was buried in the center, and other people were buried around them. This suggests these prehistoric societies probably had some kind of hierarchy. At some point, an elite class emerged in these communities. But scientists still cannot say exactly when that happened. So, they were nomads living in the Sahara before the Egyptians, and they had some kind of hierarchy in their culture. But what happened to them? Well, no one can say for sure, but we do have some clues. Many of these monuments were built when the Sahara was starting to dry up. Yep, a long time ago, this desert was actually green. But little by little, the summer monsoon started pulling back from north to south. That meant less rain, fewer pastures, and a much harder life for people who depended on animals. Because of that, these nomads may have had to change the way they lived and probably headed south or toward the Nile. We still need more studies, But for now, it looks like these burial monuments are just one part of a much bigger story. A story about how humans adapted to climate change across North Africa. You are digging in Egypt's famous Saqqara necropolis, also known as the ultimate VIP graveyard for pharaohs, when suddenly you find a giant pink door, hiding something no one knew existed. Behind this giant stone door, one that was not supposed to open, by the way, you find a lost tomb of Egyptian royalty. All right, history lovers, it is time to buckle up, because archaeologists just pulled off something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Let us travel all the way to Saqqara, one of Egypt's most mysterious and treasure-packed ancient sites. The star of the show, the prince you have probably never heard of, Prince Userefra, son of King Userkaf. No one important. Just, the founder of Egypt's 5th dynasty. No big deal. But the way his tomb was discovered, it all started with a massive door made of pink granite, no less. But this is not just a regular stone slab. This thing is about 14 to 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide. A giraffe could easily walk through it. This door is also definitely heavier than your neighbor's SUV. But here is the twist. It was not a real door. It was a false door, a symbolic gateway meant to allow the spirit of the deceased to pass between the world of the living and the afterlife. Normally, that is where the story ends. After all, false doors are common in tombs. But this one was extra special. You see, false doors were usually made out of limestone, which was pretty common and found everywhere in Egypt. To build one out of red or pink granite, people had to bring these rocks from a quarry located 400 miles away. And you can bet this was not a cheap trip. According to Egyptologists, this is the first time a false door of this size and material has ever been found in Egypt, making it a totally unique piece of architecture. Aside from being super expensive, this one had a surprise behind it too. When the team of researchers investigated further, they realized that this false door actually hid a real entrance. And what did it lead to? A hidden tomb packed with statues, relics, and secrets from over 4,000 years ago. The tomb belongs to Prince Userefra, but you can call him Wazir Ifra or Wazir Efra too. Despite being totally erased from history, this man was no minor noble. The hieroglyphs on the pink granite door listed him as the hereditary prince, governor of Buto and Nekeb, royal scribe, minister, judge, and priest of Sais. Phew! He was like the ancient Egyptian version of Daenerys Targaryen. These inscriptions not only identify his political and religious roles, but also suggest he held significant power in Lower and Upper Egypt, bridging both regions through his titles. One title in particular, the priest of Saqqara, links him to the deity of the necropolis, the one with the falcon head. This god was the patron of the living and god of the dead at the same time. So, I guess the forgotten prince was kind of a big deal, considering that his tomb was placed in such a prestigious location within Saqqara. What is even more mysterious is that Prince Userefre does not appear in official king lists or royal family trees, which makes us wonder if he passed away before he could rule, or if his legacy was deliberately erased in one of ancient Egypt's classic political dramas. Some scholars now believe his erasure might be connected with shifting religious or political power struggles during the early 5th dynasty, especially as his father Userkaf was reshaping Egypt's religious order. And speaking of his father, King Userkaf was a total game-changer. He was not just the founder of the 5th dynasty, he also kicked off a religious revolution by promoting the sun god Ra over older deities. That is right. Userkaf built the very first sun temple at Abu Sir, setting off a dynasty-wide obsession with solar worship. After Userkaf wrapped up his short but revolutionary reign, a whole lineup of pharaohs took the stage. Sahura, Nefer-ir-Kare, Neferefre, basically the boy band of the 5th dynasty. And these guys were all about two things: building pyramids and making money. They were not just stacking stones. They were expanding Egypt's influence, opening up trade routes to far-off lands and decorating their temples like it was nobody's business. Back in the tomb, things got even cooler. There was a beautiful red granite offering table covered with inscriptions detailing ritual foods, like an eternal menu for the afterlife, because they believed the deceased could magically eat this food. Fun fact, it was the funerary priests and their families who actually ate the food. There were also pottery shards, amulets, and painted walls. But the real showstoppers were the statues. And this is exactly where things get weird, in a good way. The team found statues of King Djoser, the guy who built Egypt's first pyramid, his wife, and their 10 daughters inside Prince Userefre's tomb. Hold up. Djoser lived a few centuries before Userkaf. So what were his statues doing there? Turns out scientists do not really know. These statues were built during the reign of King Djoser himself and probably belonged to that first ever built pyramid. Experts believe these statues were probably moved during the 26th dynasty, thousands of years after Djoser. Maybe to protect them from destruction, or maybe because they were still honored. Basically, ancient Egyptians were hoarders, but classy ones. Scientists also know for a fact that some engravings and statues found there were made much later, which means that this tomb probably turned into a storage place for fancy stuff. Or maybe this was just really ancient interior decorating. Anyway, that was not all. There was another pink granite entrance on the eastern side of the tomb with inscriptions linking back to King Neferirkar, another 5th dynasty pharaoh who also tried to build his own pyramid but failed. And near this second entrance, archaeologists found something never seen before in Saqqara. A set of 13 pink granite statues, all sitting in a row on a high-backed bench like they were waiting at the DMV of the afterlife. Some had raised heads, probably representing the prince's wives, while others were missing their heads entirely. One black granite statue was found upside down. Maybe it had taken a fall sometime during the tomb's long, quiet centuries underground. According to archaeologists, the positions and head shapes suggest that these statues followed a strict social hierarchy, with the central figures likely representing higher status individuals, while the headless ones might show unfinished work or later vandalism. And speaking of black granite statues, another one was found standing proudly inside the tomb. Based on its design and inscriptions, it looks like it was placed there during the 26th dynasty, the same time those Djoser statues were probably moved in. This suggests the tomb did not just sit abandoned. It was reused, changed, and maybe even honored by later generations. And by the way, black granite was associated with Osiris, the god of the underworld during the late period, which means that this statue's presence is a clue that the tomb was a ritual space long after the prince's death. All of this, giant granite doors, surprise statues, reused tombs, adds up to a truly thrilling find. Prince Userefre may not be a household name yet, but his tomb is now one of the most fascinating ever found in Saqqara. It tells a story not just of the Old Kingdom, but of how ancient Egyptians kept connecting to their past even thousands of years later. So, what does it all mean? Why hide a tomb behind a fake door? Why pack it with statues from different eras? And who exactly was Prince Userefre? These are the kinds of mysteries that keep archaeologists digging and keep the rest of us fascinated. In the end, this discovery is not just about one tomb. It is about how much is still waiting beneath the sands of Egypt. As more gets uncovered, we are reminded again and again that ancient history is not gone. It is just sleeping behind massive pink granite doors. Not many civilizations are as mysterious as ancient Egypt, a powerful empire that lasted over 3,000 years. It gave us pyramids that still stand and myths that still inspire. It is one of the most explored places on Earth, yet somehow we still find exciting things. In Abydos, archaeologists just uncovered a 3,600-year-old royal tomb. It is huge. It has golden hieroglyphs of deities covering the entrance. But the pharaoh's name, it is not there. It is missing. Who was this ruler? And what new chapter could this open in Egypt's story? If there is one place in Egypt where the line between life and death feels thinner, it is Abydos. To the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred ground. They believed it was the burial place of Osiris, the god who literally passed away, had his remains separated, and came back to life to rule the underworld. Because of that, Abydos became Egypt's spiritual gathering place. Pharaohs built amazing temples here, like the Temple of Seti, famous for its king list, a wall that has the names of 76 pharaohs carved into it. Pilgrims came from across Egypt, leaving offerings and taking part in Osiris festivals where his death and rebirth were acted out in rituals. It was not just symbolic worship. It was Egypt's version of Comic-Con. But instead of dressing like superheroes, people acted out gods coming back to life. Obviously, pharaohs competed to be buried as close to Osiris as possible. Abydos became part cemetery, part holy city, part afterlife insurance policy. Fast forward thousands of years, and we still uncover remarkable things around Abydos. That is the case with the recently discovered tomb. In early 2025, a joint team of researchers from the US and Egypt decided to dig beneath a rocky rise ominously called Anubis Mountain. You remember Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who guarded cemeteries. The uncovered royal burial was hidden 23 feet below the surface. Sadly, even though it escaped archaeologists for so long, robbers had already carried away its treasures ages ago. They could definitely tell this was the tomb of someone super important. It is kind of like how you can walk around a mansion with no furniture, but still figure out that someone rich must have lived there. The chamber had mud brick vaults rising over 16 feet. That is taller than a female giraffe standing upright. For something built 36 centuries ago, it still felt enormous. However, when you remember that Egyptians were masters of architecture, nothing seems surprising. So, no treasures, no golden mask, and sadly, no name. The cartouche that should have shown the king's identity was unreadable. Egyptian tombs usually proudly said who was inside. In ancient Egypt, a cartouche was basically a big oval name tag for kings, written in hieroglyphs. Think of them as VIP passes that worked in both this life and the next. Without it, your soul could not check in to the afterlife hotel. That is because, to the Egyptians, your name, your Ren, was not just so your teacher could tell you apart from kids with the same haircut. It was a core part of who you were. As long as your Ren survived, so did you. To have your name forgotten was considered a fate worse than passing away. A soul cannot travel without a name. That is why you would see cartouches all over the place, on temples, obelisks, jewelry, statues, and tomb walls. It was not there just for show. It kept the pharaoh's presence front and center everywhere you looked. Imagine building a massive tomb only for people 3,600 years later to walk in and go, who is this guy again? Not cool at all. That is why it is fair to imagine our nameless pharaoh haunting the robbers for all eternity. So, yeah, the cartouche was considered very important. One of the most famous and mind-blowing examples comes from the tomb of Thutmose III. His burial chamber and sarcophagus were literally shaped like a cartouche. In other words, the entire room was a living architectural symbol of his name. Thankfully, in the recently discovered tomb, not everything was erased. Painted in golden colors at the entrance were two familiar guardians, the deities Isis and Nephthys. Isis was the magician who put Osiris back together and breathed life into him. Nephthys, her sister, was the eternal mourner and protector of the mummy. Together, they promised that whoever rested here would not face the afterlife alone. And that is one more proof of the importance of the mysterious pharaoh. So, who could this be? To answer that, we need to go down history lane. This tomb dates back to Egypt's messy chapter called the Second Intermediate Period. Instead of one ruler in charge, the country had many rival kingdoms, each with its own little power base. like a real-life Egyptian version of Game of Thrones. And right in the middle of that chaos was Abydos. For a while, it was home to its own line of kings, the so-called Abydos dynasty. Those were not the pyramid builders everyone knows. And that is why they are so mysterious. They left behind almost nothing. No great monuments, no sprawling cities, just fragments of names on broken blocks. For centuries, many scholars even doubted they existed at all. That sort of changed in 2014 when archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Senebke, one of those shadowy kings. Now, everything we know about Senebke points to him having quite a story to tell. His bones revealed 18 deep wounds, the kind you get in battle. He had blows to his skull, back, and hands, and likely lost his life fighting, making him one of the few pharaohs we know who sadly fell in combat. His tomb was modest, with reused artifacts from earlier kings, but it gave us one priceless thing: proof. Until Senebke, the Abydos dynasty was just a theory. With him, it became real. And that is why the new discovery could be a big deal. The newly uncovered royal tomb at Abydos shares the same layout and style as Senebke's. It has limestone chambers, mud brick vaults, and protective deities, although it is much bigger. Which again raises the possibility that we are looking at an even earlier, more powerful ruler of Abydos. Whoever he was, he wanted to be remembered alongside the greats, which is ironic because it seems that history tried erasing him. Perhaps additional findings around his tomb could tell us more. Yes, there is more, and it is actually pretty cool. Not far from Abydos, in the village of Banawit, archaeologists uncovered a Roman-era pottery workshop. Yeah, you heard that right, a pottery factory close to a pharaoh's burial ground. The site had huge clay kilns, storage rooms, and even broken shards called ostraca. They were basically ancient sticky notes, except instead of shopping lists, they had receipts scratched onto them in Greek and Demotic Egyptian. Little records of everyday transactions, the kind of thing you would never expect to find near a lost dynasty king. Honestly, the potters missed a chance. Forget boring receipts. They should have been selling Osiris mugs and Anubis figurines to pilgrims and tourists. But that is not all. It seems that centuries later, during the medieval period, the same ground became a cemetery. Archaeologists found mud brick graves with skeletal remains. This could mean that Abydos kept its feeling of importance for hundreds of years after the age of pharaohs. So why this hill again and again? Is this place really a gateway to the afterlife? It is, after all, the very place where Osiris is said to rest. That belief stayed like a shadow for thousands of years, strong enough to draw in pharaohs and later medieval families. Different rituals, same sacred ground. Although, to be fair, the Romans were not here for Osiris. They came to make pots. The story of Abydos is not over. The excavations will continue, and who knows what else could be discovered in the future. Today, archaeologists are armed with tools that are basically X-ray glasses for the desert. Every scan could reveal a hidden chamber, or, if we are lucky, finally give our nameless pharaoh his wren back. In fact, I became strangely invested in finding out who he was. So, let us hope for some news soon. It is only a matter of time. Do you have your own theories? Let me know.